So now I'm going to talk about human hearts. As a child, I thought that people in the past lived in a black and white world, that I could telepathically control the music on the radio, that quicksand was an ever-present threat requiring hypervigilance, that words on maps were gigantic letters in the sky, and that the moon followed me around. As a teenager, I believed hard work was generally rewarded, that the law existed to protect everyone, that I lived in an enlightened moment, and injustice would soon be contained in history books. As an adult, I have thought, and sometimes still do think, as roughly 90% of people do, that I am more honest than most people, that most of my thoughts are worth thinking, especially this latest one, and that I am more or less uninfluenced by most advertisements, and despite everything acknowledged above, that I know who I am. Perhaps the greatest injustice that we perpetrate against ourselves is that we pretend to know who we are. If we knew, it would make all the questions about technology simpler. Knowing what's best for us, we could then ask directly what technologies help achieve that end and have our moment of decision. There might be technologies whose goodness we couldn't judge, but there would be far more to which we could simply apply our yardstick and then decide yes or no. But we don't know who we are. The problem isn't the absence of an answer, but that we've forgotten the art and necessity of asking. Or maybe it's worse than that. We've grown to believe that admitting we don't know who we are is weakness. In a world in which certainty is more valuable than the content of the opinion, we deliberately avoid, or try to avoid, or are encouraged to avoid the only question that can't be avoided. And by not asking, we implicitly accept the answers that dominate our current technological society. To ask who we are, or what technology essentially is, feels like it should be someone else's work. Questions like that are too grand, in all likelihood useless, and unanswerable in any case. We have so many things to attend to, and we don't have time for that. We don't even have time to shop at a bookstore or supermarket, to handwrite a letter, or go to the movies. But we do have time for it. Technological society has led us to think of our time, too, as merely the raw material for the creation of novel forms of matter. Technological society has transformed a birthright, making meaning of the passage of time, into a commodity that only the independently wealthy get to regularly enjoy, and often not even them. We've produced leisure, but not free time, and leisure is only the preparation and refueling for work. Instead of work providing us the means to live, our lives have come to serve work. Instead of human communities pursuing their aspirations with the aid of technology, communities are atomized into individuals who are reorganized to serve technological society. This is part of the order of technological society, part of the mechanism that allows it to function invisibly and appear like the normal evolution of our species, as if it were ordained on high that the caveman's club would give way to mobile phones and then to the latest curiosity become essential need. We are preoccupied with the achievement that technology makes possible, but at the same time, technology has a funny way of getting us to advance its own proliferation rather than our well-being. Almost every technological innovation in our lives has, as best we can tell, made it incrementally better. Now we can do more, we can see and hear more, we can work faster, be more efficient, waste less. We can be where we want to be, see who we want to see. We can travel to a cafe in a foreign city without asking anyone for directions. We can know the diseases in our genetic code that will manifest in 20 years. We can page through 1,000 books in a portion of a second. We can remember everyone's birthday. Technology always seems to be making our lives easier and better. But somehow the dividends it pays never accrue in the way that we imagined. Somehow all the little steps we take, or are nudged to take, sum to one giant misstep, or at least a growing discomfort. Recently, as we awake and bring our morning coffee to our desks, tilting our monitors and straightening the backs of our adjustable chairs, we find ourselves less and less at ease. Somehow, the ever-increasing size of the monitor blocks out more than it reveals, and the friendly screen of the smartphone chirping with incoming bits of information only interrupts our thoughts as we want it to. A quarter of adults say that they go online almost constantly. When including podcasts and music, the average American spends more than 11 hours a day consuming media. Is that what we want? Maybe, and maybe not. This will change everything is the boast of every major new tech development, but this change has a direction. And how sure are we really that this direction is good, that it's progress? Today, those of us who are lucky enough to have careers work longer hours than hunters and gatherers did. Despite communication technologies that would have seemed magical to a previous generation, isolation and loneliness to the point where clinical treatment is necessary have become positively common. Despite generating enough wealth for every citizen in the world to be free from fear of hunger and untreated illness, we continue to preserve a large class who toil in legitimate worry regarding their ability to meet their most basic needs, and a truly desperate class who suffer acutely. Today we witness this fear even in colleges filled with the children of the more or less privileged. Many college students are so fearful of not getting a job that they'll pursue what are functionally vocational courses at the expense of their own intellectual and spiritual growth, even during these few years when society has, in theory, agreed that their own human growth is most important. Wasn't the whole point of technology to free us from fear and toil for higher pursuits? Who could possibly believe that technology is delivering on its promise? Yet the momentum of technological society somehow persuades us to offer it our faith, or at least our lives. Somehow, almost no one seriously doubts that a massive part of collective human energy should be spent pursuing technological developments at every scale, from those we wear on our wrists to the satellites that circle the globe, and every sector, from education to military to healthcare. At the same time, it is shockingly easy for us to see, if we have the human hearts to look, the immense amount of present and future harm that flow from this commitment, even if one grants that it has many real merits. We can see the harm, but we're told that some disruption is healthy, and our gaze is directed toward all the exciting new technologies, which really do seem to be improving every year. Compare the average home, car, baby carriage, lawnmower, entertainment system, almost anything from a generation ago to those now available, and some kind of improvement is usually quite obvious. And in some cases, more people seem to have access to these devices. Today, even the poorest people are quite likely to have a mobile phone. And it's not just better things, it's better processes. A century of newspaper articles can be searched in seconds at home instead of hours at the library. Scientific management and the proliferation of best practices in institutions as diverse as medicine, education, law enforcement, and the military have ensured that human capital is more efficiently managed than ever before. Social media has facilitated social movements. Maybe technology will save us, we think, before we forget and follow the next link. Maybe science and technology will produce the good life that they've long promised, not just for me, but for everyone. And then the news reports of the next horror or absurdity, and we slouch and we think, oh dear. Or maybe we feel nothing at all. Humans alive in this generation are collectively more powerful than any species and any generation the earth has ever known. In the sense of increasing human power over the rest of the natural world, progress truly is undeniable and decisive. But are most humans in the individuality in which we actually experience our lives more empowered? We waffle between belief in a better world and acceptance of the status quo. But sadly, our optimism is increasingly directed at the trivial, a better phone, car, or television series. And our hopelessness is directed at everything that matters: the protection of the natural world from human excess, meeting basic human needs, food produced without poison or cruelty, the availability of true free time in which to cultivate true freedom. But there's not enough time for such higher hopes. Our devices are calling, and despite our discomfort, we are, in the end, more or less obedient. None of this is to deny the immense value of the right technology at the right time. If you're in danger from a person attacking you and someone hands you a weapon that you can use as a deterrent, you should surely take it. But if your benefactor then goes and gives the same weapon to your enemy, you will realize that he was not your benefactor, but more like an arms dealer playing both sides. This is what visibly happens with many technologies. Email saves time, but as soon as that time dividend is realized, or maybe even before, more is demanded of us. We still look at those pushing the technology as benefactors, and some obviously are our benefactors, like those who develop vaccines that spare us the full force of pandemics. But generally, profiteer is a more accurate image. Or more innocently, one could imagine the leaders of Silicon Valley as a pack of young children who are the first to wander into a tool shed. They start handing out tools to whatever other kids push to the front of the line. Here's a hammer, here's a shovel, here's a weed cutter, here's a chainsaw. Take them and be merry. What harm could possibly come? Many of our communication technologies presumably began as diminished substitutes for an impossible activity. But then a funny thing happened. We began to prefer the diminished substitutes, or at least to behave as if we did. It's easier to phone someone than to make the effort to meet in person. Leaving a message on someone's machine is easier than having a phone conversation. You can say what you need to say without a response. Hard news is easier to leave. You can check in without becoming entangled. So we began calling when we knew no one would pick up. Shooting off an email is easier still because one can further hide behind the absence of vocal inflection, and of course there's no chance of accidentally catching someone. And texting is even easier, as the expectation for articulateness is further reduced, and another shell is offered to hide in. Each step forward has made it easier, just a little, to avoid the emotional work of being present, to write LOL rather than actually laugh out loud, to send a crying emoji rather than actually cry, to convey information rather than humanity. According to traditional rabbinic law, when saying the required daily prayers to oneself, one must move one's lips, physically forming each word. One cannot simply think the words of the prayer or simply intend them and play a recording. It's too likely, among the other concerns of the rabbis, that our minds will wander, and then we won't have prayed at all. The rabbis know they can't legislate that our minds not wander, nor can they legislate that our hearts have the right intention. But prayer, to remain prayer, they insist, must be connected with our embodied existence. Am I paranoid to wonder if in some distant future some children may send smile and frown emojis as needed to solicit the desired response, completely unaware that once upon a time people used embodied smiles and frowns to communicate or dissemble what they felt? Surely it won't go that far. But how far in that direction are we willing to venture? The problem with accepting, with preferring diminished substitutes is that over time we too become diminished substitutes. It's easier to friend someone than to be someone's friend. It's easier to like things than to love them. The question is it better? Is it possible that not all difficult things are to be avoided? Is it possible that some are to be sought? It's more difficult to be someone who engages deeply with others, who loves deeply and is deeply loved. It is more difficult to live with originality instead of within the same set of reductionist parameters established by corporations. It is easy to buy what is sold to you. It is more difficult to eschew confirmations of who you are and instead explore the world seeking accidents, seeking the unexpected and new. Isn't it possible that technology, in the forms in which it's entered our everyday lives in recent years, has diminished us? And isn't it possible, isn't it obvious that it's diminishing us more and more? Many of our now common technologies caused alarm in the early days, and we adapted, didn't we? So maybe no resistance is actually necessary. But if it were, where would it come from? And what would it look like? Technological society hides its failings and misrepresents all progress as driven by its own peculiar engines. And plunged into a warm, apathetic stupor, distracted by pseudo-events, and taking the promise of technology at face value, we haplessly pursue further technological solutions to technological problems. We create highways with multiple lanes to end traffic jams. We invent inexpensive video conferencing technology. But instead of seeing our distant friends or coworkers more often, we find ourselves more distant from our friends and coworkers. We are alone together, at least sometimes, at least more often than we once expected or ever accepted. Amidst a dull and unlocatable roar, emotional connection is increasingly replaced with a strange and Sisyphusian compulsion to relentlessly communicate. We are creating the affliction and calling it the cure. We think of technologies as satisfying our wants, but it's just as accurate today to say that technologies exploit our wants, our fears, and our hopes for all sorts of other ends. The needs are being created at a faster pace than the satisfactions. Think about your own use of email. It's clearly facilitated communication, so much so that it's become impossible to remember or explain how we ever got anything done without it. But does email make you less busy? Does it make you feel closer to those that you care about? It's facilitated communication, but has it made you a better communicator? And what person or institution was it that thought that this would be a better way to live? Who made the decision to change everyone's life? It seems irrevocably, because they were dissatisfied with the pace of the Postal Service. With each generation, it becomes less possible to imagine a future that resembles the present. Our grandparents hoped that we would have better lives than they did. Perhaps their wildest dreams were that we would graduate from a university. If we think about our grandchildren, with an acknowledgement that the rate of technological change is parabolic, it's impossible to imagine what their lives will be like. What futures would we dismiss as impossible? Within our lifetimes, cars will drive themselves, computing will move off of screens and into our bodies, and 3D printers will make stores unnecessary. One day sooner than we can imagine, nanomachines will detect weaknesses in our hearts, long before any symptoms would bring us to a doctor. And other nanomachines will repair our hearts without our feeling any pain, losing any time, or spending any money. But it will only feel like a miracle, and it will only be a miracle if we are still capable of feeling miracles, which is to say, if our hearts are still human. Thank you.
Jonathan Safran Foer. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you much.